The crowd parted like ripples across a pond as Josephine Zachary made her way down Main Street, her black mourning dress hanging like a shadow from her slim frame. Whispers followed her, cruel, persistent, and as sharp as daggers. 3 weeks had passed since she'd buried her husband, Matthew, and in that time, the people of Tonopah Junction, Nevada, had transformed her from grieving widow to suspected murderer. It was May of 1876, and the spring air held the promise of warmth that hadn't yet reached Josephine's heart. The town was still young, like many in the West, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the divide between civilization and wilderness, its fortunes tied to the nearby silver mines that had drawn so many hopefuls westward. Josephine kept her gaze fixed ahead as she walked toward the general store. She delayed this trip as long as possible, surviving on the dwindling supplies in her pantry until necessity forced her into town. Her home, a small but sturdy cabin Matthew had built on the edge of town, had become both sanctuary and prison in recent weeks. "Morning, Mrs. Zachary," said Harold Peterson, the store owner, his voice carrying none of the warmth it once had. "What can I help you with today?" "I need flour, coffee, sugar, and salt," Josephine said quietly, setting her basket on the counter. "And some lamp oil." Harold nodded stiffly, moving around the store to gather her items. From the corner of her eye, Josephine could see Mrs. Whitfield and Mrs. Collins huddled together, their glances flicking toward her between whispered exchanges. "That'll be $3.40, Harold said, placing the last item in her basket. Josephine reached into her small coin purse and counted out the money. When she looked up, Harold was watching her with suspicious eyes, as if expecting her to pay with blood money. "Thank you," she said, collecting her basket. "Mrs. Zachary," he said, lowering his voice, "might be best if you send someone else to do your shopping in the future, for your own comfort." The suggestion was clear: stay away. Josephine felt her throat tighten but nodded and turned to leave, determined not to let them see her cry. She'd done enough of that behind closed doors. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, her basket caught on the doorframe, spilling some of her purchases. While she knelt to retrieve them, she heard the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw a small group of riders coming into town, trail dust coating their clothes. They were clearly new arrivals and, thankfully, uninformed about the local widow whom everyone believed had poisoned her husband for his mining claim. The lead rider, a tall man with broad shoulders, dismounted in front of the saloon across the street. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard country, his hat pulled low against the sun. Something about his posture caught Josephine's attention, a sense of purpose, rather than the casual weariness of most drifters. Gathering her things quickly, Josephine hurried away from the store, keeping her head down. She'd almost reached the edge of town when she heard footsteps behind her. "Madam, you dropped this." She turned to find the newcomer standing a respectful distance away, holding out a small paper package of sugar that must have fallen from her basket. "Thank you," she said, reaching for it. He tipped his hat, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. His face was tanned and weathered from the sun, but she guessed him to be in his early 30s. A faint scar ran along his jawline. "Adam Everett," he introduced himself. "Just rode in with my men. We're bringing cattle up from Arizona Territory." "Josephine Zachary," she replied automatically, then regretted giving her name when she saw recognition flicker in the eyes of a passerby who'd overheard. "Mrs. Zachary was just leaving," the woman said pointedly to Adam. "I'm sure she's very busy." Adam's gaze shifted between the woman and Josephine, his expression unreadable. "I don't believe we've met, madam," he said to the interfering woman, Martha Collins. "My husband's on the town council." She straightened importantly. You and your men planning to stay long? A few days to rest the herd before continuing north, Adam replied, his attention already returning to Josephine. Is there a problem here? Before Mrs. Collins could respond, Josephine shook her head. No problem. Thank you again for retrieving my sugar, Mr. Everett. Good day to you both. She walked away quickly, feeling their eyes on her back. The encounter had drawn attention she didn't need, but there was something about the stranger, a directness in his gaze that had lacked the judgment she'd grown accustomed to seeing. The walk home seemed longer than usual. Josephine's legs ached by the time she reached her cabin, set apart from the others at the eastern edge of town. It was a simple structure, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and a small covered porch where she and Matthew used to sit in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Inside, she set her basket on the kitchen table and began putting away her purchases. The house felt cavernous in its emptiness. Every corner held memories of Matthew, the chair where he'd sit to remove his boots after a day at the mine, the mug he'd drink his morning coffee from, the bed they'd shared for the 3 short years of their marriage. She was placing the coffee on a shelf when a knock at the door startled her. Visitors were rare these days and rarely welcome. Wiping her hands on her apron, Josephine approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Sheriff Miller, Mrs. Zachary, need a word." Josephine sighed and opened the door. Sheriff Thomas Miller stood on her porch, thumbs hooked in his belt. Though he'd never formally accused her of anything, his suspicions were evident in every interaction. "What can I help you with, Sheriff?" she asked, staying in the doorway rather than inviting him in. "New folks in town," he said. "Cattle drive passing through. Just wanted to make sure you knew to keep your distance. Don't need any more trouble." The implication was clear: don't taint the newcomers with your scandal. "I have no intention of causing trouble," Josephine replied evenly. "I spoke briefly to one of them only because he returned something I dropped." Sheriff Miller nodded slowly. "That would be Everett. He came by the office asking about accommodations for his men. Seems to be running a respectable operation." He paused, studying her. "Also asked about you." Josephine couldn't hide her surprise. "Me? Why would he?" "That's what I'd like to know," the sheriff interrupted. "Said he was curious about the lady everyone was whispering about in town. I told him the basics, that your husband died suddenly 3 weeks back, and there are unanswered questions." "Unanswered because you refuse to believe the truth," Josephine said, a rare flash of anger breaking through her careful composure. "Matthew was ill for days before he died. The mining work was exhausting him and he'd been coughing. And yet Dr. Phillips found no sign of lung sickness," Sheriff Miller countered. "Just stomach distress consistent with certain poisons. Same symptoms reported by others who have taken meals at your table recently." "I didn't poison anyone," Josephine insisted, the same words she'd repeated countless times. "The mine foreman and Mr. Reeves were sick because we all ate the same stew made with those wild mushrooms Matthew brought home. He wasn't poisoned, he gathered something he shouldn't have." "Convenient explanation," Sheriff Miller said. "Especially since Matthew was the only one who died, and he just filed a promising claim." Josephine felt the familiar wave of helplessness. Nothing she said made any difference. The town had decided her guilt based on circumstance and gossip. "Is there anything else, Sheriff?" she asked tiredly. He shook his head. "Just stay out of trouble, Mrs. Zachary, and if this Everett fellow comes sniffing around, you'd be wise to send him on his way. He seems like a decent sort, wouldn't want him getting mixed up in your situation." After the sheriff left, Josephine closed the door and leaned against it, closing her eyes against the burn of tears. The unfairness of it all crashed over her anew. She and Matthew had come to Tonopah Junction with such hope, planning to build a life together. Now he was gone, and she was alone with nothing but suspicion and hostility surrounding her. The small silver-framed photograph on the mantel caught her eye their wedding day, Matthew standing proud in his best suit, his arm around her waist. His smile had been so bright, his dreams for their future so certain. "I didn't do it, Matthew," she whispered to the empty room. "I would never have hurt you." Night fell, bringing cooler air through the open windows. Josephine lit a lamp and prepared a simple supper of bread and cheese, her appetite minimal as always these days. She was washing her plate when another knock came at the door, this one hesitant rather than authoritative. Frowning, she approached cautiously. "Who's there?" "Adam Everett, madam." From this morning. Josephine froze, remembering the sheriff's warning. What could this stranger possibly want? Curiosity overcame caution, and she opened the door partway, keeping the chain latched. Adam stood on her porch, hat in hand. He'd clearly cleaned up since their earlier encounter, his dark hair still damp at the temples. "Mr. Everett," she acknowledged. "It's rather late for social calls." "I apologize for the hour," he said. "I would have come sooner, but it took time to get the cattle settled." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Mrs. Zachary, I believe I may have information that could be of interest to you regarding your husband's passing." Josephine stared at him, confusion and sudden hope battling within her. What could you possibly know about Matthew? "May I come in? What I have to say shouldn't be discussed on a doorstep." Every instinct told Josephine to be cautious. She didn't know this man, and inviting him into her home would only feed the town's gossip. Yet something in his direct gaze compelled her trust. "Very well," she said, unlatching the chain. "But I can spare only a few minutes." Adam stepped inside, removing his hat and holding it respectfully before him. He glanced around the modest home, taking in the neat simplicity of her surroundings. "Please sit," Josephine said, gesturing to the table before taking a seat herself. She kept her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Adam settled into a chair opposite her. "Mrs. Zachary, I understand your husband died after consuming what are believed to be poisonous mushrooms. Is that correct?" "Yes," she replied cautiously, "though most believe I deliberately poisoned him." "And these mushrooms, were they small, with reddish-brown caps growing in clusters?" Josephine leaned forward slightly, surprised by his specific question. "Yes, exactly." Matthew found them while checking some new ground for his claim. He was so pleased, said his mother used to gather similar ones back east. Adam nodded slowly. "I believe I know the mushrooms you're describing. They grow in parts of Arizona and Nevada. They look remarkably similar to an edible variety, but they contain a toxin that causes severe stomach distress. I've seen cattle poisoned by them, and I once had a ranch hand who nearly died after eating them in a stew." Hope flared in Josephine's chest. "You've seen this before. Then you know it could have been a tragic mistake, not murder." "More than that," Adam said quietly. "The poison in these mushrooms affects people differently. Some recover after a day or two of illness. Others, particularly those already weakened by hard work or existing conditions, can succumb more easily." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. This was the first time since Matthew's death that anyone had spoken words that aligned with what she knew to be true. "Matthew had been working so hard at the mine," she whispered. "He was exhausted, already coughing from the dust." "Which would have made him more vulnerable," Adam confirmed. "Mrs. Zachary, I don't know you and I didn't know your husband. But I've seen enough of frontier justice to recognize when a community has decided on someone's guilt without proper evidence." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, wiping away a stray tear. "Why would you help a stranger?" Adam's expression softened slightly. Because I came to town looking for someone, and your name came up in a way that didn't sit right with me. You were looking for someone in Tonopah Junction. Who? A man named Reeves. Samuel Reeves. I understand he was one of the people who dined with you and your husband that night. Josephine nodded slowly. Yes, he and Mr. Blackwell, the mine foreman. They both fell ill but recovered. Samuel hasn't spoken to me since, though we were friends before everything happened. I've been tracking Reeves across 3 territories, Adam said, his voice hardening slightly. He's not who he claims to be. His real name is Samuel Riggs, and he's wanted in Arizona for claim jumping and the murder of 2 miners. The revelation hit Josephine like a physical blow. Murder? But that's impossible. Samuel has been in Tonopah Junction for nearly a year. He works as a clerk at the assay office. Perfect position to identify promising claims, Adam pointed out. Mrs. Zachary, did your husband tell anyone else about his new find before he told Reeves? Josephine thought back, trying to remember the details of that fateful evening. No, she said slowly. It was at dinner that he announced it. He was so excited, said he'd found a vein that looked promising. Samuel congratulated him, offered to help with the paperwork. She trailed off as realization dawned. You think Samuel had something to do with Matthew's death? I think it's a possibility worth investigating, Adam said carefully. I'm not a lawman, Mrs. Zachary. I'm a rancher. But Riggs killed my friend back in Arizona, and I've been following his trail since I identified him 6 months ago. Why not go directly to Sheriff Miller with this information? Adam's expression turned grim. Because Samuel Riggs is clever. He establishes himself in communities, builds trust, and without proof, my word against his would mean little, especially as a stranger in town. So why come to me? Josephine asked. Because you have more reason than anyone to want the truth revealed, Adam said simply. And because I need someone who knows the town, who can help me gather the evidence needed to prove who Riggs really is. Josephine stood and paced to the window, looking out at the darkness. The idea that Matthew's death might not have been an accident after all, but murder, it was both horrifying and strangely validating. If true, it would clear her name, but at what cost? The knowledge that someone they'd welcomed into their home had deliberately harmed them was almost too painful to bear. How can you be certain it's the same man? She asked, turning back to Adam. I've been careful, he replied. Followed his movements from Arizona to California, then here. The pattern is always the same. He arrives in mining towns, works in positions that give him access to claim information, befriends successful miners, and then accidents happen. When I heard about your situation, the similarities were too strong to ignore. Josephine returned to her seat, mind racing. Even if what you say is true, how could we possibly prove it? The town has already decided I'm guilty. No one would believe me accusing someone else now. They'd think I was desperate. That's why we need to be smart, Adam said. Gather evidence. Find out if there have been other suspicious deaths connected to Reeves in this area. And most importantly, determine if he's planning his next move. The proposition was dangerous, Josephine knew. If Samuel truly was a murderer, confronting him could put her in grave danger. Yet the alternative, continuing to live under the shadow of false accusation, eventually being forced to leave the home and life she and Matthew had built, seemed equally unbearable. If we did this, she said carefully, no one could know we're working together. The town already thinks the worst of me, if they see me with a stranger, particularly a man. I understand, Adam nodded. We'll need to be discreet. But Mrs. Zachary, Josephine, if I may, I believe we can uncover the truth. And when we do, you'll be free of these false suspicions. The way he said her name, with simple respect rather than suspicion, nearly undid her. It had been weeks since anyone in Tonopah Junction had spoken to her with basic human decency. "Very well, Mr. Everett," she said finally. "I'll help you. Not just to clear my name, but because if Samuel Reeves did have something to do with Matthew's death, he deserves justice." Adam stood, seeming relieved at her decision. "Thank you. I'll be moving my herd to the north pasture tomorrow, but I'll find a way to contact you soon. In the meantime, please be careful. Don't let Reeves know you suspect anything." After Adam left, Josephine sat alone in her quiet house, her mind whirling with this new perspective on her husband's death. She'd accepted it as a tragic accident, had mourned Matthew and fought against the town's suspicions while believing that nature, not malice, had taken him from her. Now, uncertainty gnawed at her. Had Matthew been deliberately targeted? Had she unknowingly served death at her own table? The thought was almost too terrible to contemplate. Yet mixed with her horror was a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope that the truth might finally come to light. Josephine rose and moved to the chest where she kept Matthew's personal effects. Kneeling before it, she lifted the lid and carefully removed a leather journal, Matthew's record of his mining activities. She'd been too grief-stricken to look through it after his death, but now she opened it with purpose, searching for any mention of Samuel or the new claim that had excited Matthew so much. The pages were filled with Matthew's bold handwriting, detailing his daily work, expenses, and findings. Toward the end, she found what she was looking for: an entry dated just 3 days before his death. "Found promising vein in the north section, beyond the old Wilson claim. Rock shows clear silver traces. Must file claim before word spreads. At assay office will help expedite the paperwork. Told no one else yet, not even Jay. Want to surprise her when it's official." Josephine ran her fingers over the words, tears blurring her vision. Matthew had trusted Samuel, had specifically confided in him before anyone else. If Adam's suspicions were correct, that trust had been a fatal mistake. She read on, finding a final entry from the day before the fateful dinner. "Paperwork ready for filing tomorrow. Coming for dinner tonight, bringing wine to celebrate. Found mushrooms while marking the claim boundaries. J will make her stew perfect end to a perfect day." Closing the journal, Josephine held it to her chest. These words confirmed the sequence of events, but proved nothing sinister. Yet they reinforced her determination to discover the truth, whatever it might be. If Samuel Reeves or Riggs was responsible for Matthew's death, she would help Adam expose him, no matter the cost. With renewed purpose, Josephine returned the journal to the chest and prepared for bed. For the first time since burying her husband, she fell asleep with something other than grief in her heart: the steely resolve to seek justice for the man she'd loved. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that normally would have lifted Josephine's spirits. She rose early and went about her chores with a new sense of alertness, her conversation with Adam replaying in her mind. After feeding her small flock of chickens and tending to her vegetable garden, Josephine decided it was time to take a more active role in investigating Samuel Reeves. She needed information, and while the town might shun her, there was one person who had remained, if not friendly, at least neutral: Abigail Murray, the postmistress. Abigail was a widow herself, though her husband had been lost to influenza years before Josephine arrived in Tonopah Junction. Perhaps that shared experience had kept her from joining in the worst of the gossip. Whatever the reason, she still treated Josephine with basic courtesy when their paths crossed. Josephine changed into a simple gray dress, still morning attire, but not the full black she'd worn to town yesterday, and set off toward the post office. It was a reasonable excuse for a visit. She hadn't checked for mail in weeks. The walk into town was no easier than the day before. The same stares followed her, the same whispers. But Josephine held her head higher today, fueled by the possibility that she might eventually prove her innocence. The post office occupied a small corner of the general store. Josephine timed her visit for mid-morning when fewer people were likely to be about. As she hoped, Abigail was alone behind the counter, sorting through a stack of mail. "Good morning, Abigail," Josephine said quietly. The older woman looked up, surprise crossing her face. "Josephine, didn't expect to see you again so soon." Despite her words, there was no hostility in her tone. "I realized it's been some time since I checked for mail," Josephine explained. "And, truth be told, I needed to get out of the house." Something like sympathy flickered in Abigail's eyes. "Can't be easy rattling around in that cabin alone." "No," Josephine agreed. "It isn't." Abigail turned to the row of cubbies behind her, checking for Josephine's name. "Nothing today, I'm afraid." She hesitated, then added, "Though you did get something last week. Wait here." She disappeared into the back room and returned a moment later with a small envelope. "This came for you. It's from back east Pennsylvania." Josephine took the letter, recognizing her sister's handwriting. "Thank you, Abigail. I appreciate you holding it." Instead of leaving immediately, Josephine lingered, gathering her courage. "Abigail, may I ask you something? You've been in Tonopah Junction longer than most." The postmistress regarded her curiously. "Going on 15 years now. What do you want to know?" "It's about Samuel Reeves," Josephine said, keeping her voice casual. "How long has he been in town exactly? Matthew and I arrived just over 3 years ago, and he was already established then." Abigail considered the question. "Let's see. Samuel came to town about a year before you did, so that would make it 4 years or thereabouts." "Why do you ask?" "Just thinking about things," Josephine said vaguely. "He was at dinner the night Matthew fell ill. I was wondering if he ever mentioned where he came from before Tonopah Junction." A slight frown creased Abigail's brow. "Now that you mention it, he's not one for talking about his past. Says he came from San Francisco, but not much beyond that." She lowered her voice. "Though between us, I never quite believed that. Doesn't have the manners of a city man." This aligned with what Adam had told her. Samuel Reeves was skilled at reinventing himself. "Has he received much mail in his time here? Family writing to him, perhaps?" Now Abigail looked truly suspicious. "That's an odd question, Josephine, and not really something I should discuss. Postal confidentiality and all." "Of course," Josephine backtracked quickly. "I didn't mean to pry. It's just that with everything that's happened, I've been thinking about that night, trying to make sense of it all." Abigail's expression softened slightly. "I understand, and for what it's worth, I've known you 3 years, Josephine Zachary. Never struck me as the type to harm anyone, let alone your own husband." She glanced around to ensure they were still alone, then leaned closer. "The way this town has treated you isn't right. Grief is burden enough without adding suspicion to it." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes at this unexpected show of support. "Thank you, Abigail. That means more than you know." The bell over the door jangled, and they both straightened as 2 women entered the store. Their conversation with Abigail cut short. Josephine thanked her again for the letter and turned to leave. As she was walking out, she nearly collided with a man entering. Samuel Reeves himself. He was a wiry man of medium height with a neat mustache and spectacles that gave him a scholarly appearance. "Mrs. Zachary," he said stiffly, stepping back. "Mr. Reeves," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady as she looked at him with new suspicion. "I trust you're well?" he asked, the politeness not reaching his eyes. "As well as can be expected," Josephine answered. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "Actually, I've been meaning to speak with you, Mr. Reeves. About Matthew's mining claim, the one he was so excited about that night at dinner. I believe you were helping him with the paperwork. Something flickered across Samuel's face, surprise, perhaps, or wariness. Yes, well, unfortunate timing that. The paperwork wasn't filed before his passing, so the claim reverted to open territory. He adjusted his spectacles. Someone else has filed for it since. Someone else, Josephine pressed. Who? Samuel's lips tightened. I believe Mr. Blackwell's nephew took an interest in the parcel. I processed the paperwork myself just last week. The mine foreman's nephew who hadn't even been in town when Matthew died. Convenient indeed. I see, Josephine said. And the location of this claim. Matthew's journal mentions it was north of the Wilson property, but I'd like to know the exact boundaries. Now Samuel looked distinctly uncomfortable. Mrs. Zachary, I don't see how that information helps you now. The claim belongs to someone else. Perhaps, Josephine said, but it was my husband's discovery. Surely you can understand my interest. I'm afraid I have business to attend to, Samuel said, gesturing past her. Good day, Mrs. Zachary. He brushed past her into the store, leaving Josephine standing on the boardwalk. His discomfort at her questions only strengthened her suspicions. She tucked her sister's letter into her pocket and started back toward home, more convinced than ever that Adam Everett might be right about Samuel Reeves. She was halfway home when a rider approached from behind. Turning, she recognized Adam on horseback, though he was dressed differently today, more like a working cowboy than the trail boss who'd arrived yesterday. He slowed his horse as he neared her, tipping his hat casually as if they were mere acquaintances passing on the road. Madam, he said loudly enough for anyone watching to hear. Then, lowering his voice as he drew alongside her, he added, north edge of your property by the old oak. 1 hour. Without waiting for a response, he continued on, the dust from his horse's hooves settling in his wake. Josephine maintained her pace, giving no indication that anything significant had transpired. Inside, however, her heart raced at the prospect of learning what Adam might have discovered. Upon reaching her cabin, Josephine busied herself with normal tasks, hanging laundry on the line, sweeping the porch, all while watching the clock. When the appointed time approached, she took a basket as if planning to gather wild herbs and walked casually toward the northern boundary of her small property. The old oak stood like a sentinel at the edge of her land, its sprawling branches providing welcome shade. As she approached, Adam emerged from the trees beyond, leading his horse. He'd chosen the meeting place well. It was visible from her cabin, but far enough from the main road to afford privacy. I can't stay long, he said without preamble. My men will be wondering where I've gone. But I wanted to tell you what I've learned. I spoke with Samuel this morning, Josephine said quickly. He seemed nervous when I asked about Matthew's claim. Adam's interest was immediately piqued. What did he say? That the paperwork wasn't filed before Matthew's death, so the claim reverted to open territory. Apparently the mine foreman's nephew has filed for it now. Blackwell's nephew? Adam shook his head. That fits the pattern. In Arizona, Riggs worked with a partner who would file claims after the original discoverers met with accidents. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking. Did Reeves say anything else? He was reluctant to discuss the claim's location with me, Josephine said. Became quite eager to end our conversation when I pressed. Adam nodded grimly. I've been asking subtle questions around town, careful not to arouse suspicion. Learned that Reeves arrived about 4 years ago, claiming to be from San Francisco. Before taking the assay office position, he worked briefly at the bank. The bank? Josephine frowned. Matthew never mentioned that. Because it was before your time, Adam explained. My guess is he used that position to identify minors with money or promising claims before moving to the assay office for even better access to information. Josephine shivered despite the warm day. Do you think there were others before Matthew? Other accidents? That's what we need to find out, Adam said. I'm riding out to see the claim today. Told my foreman I wanted to check the surrounding grazing land. If Reeves is following his usual pattern, he'll have the claim working within days. Probably already has men out there. Be careful, Josephine warned, if he suspects you're investigating him. Adam's expression softened slightly. I've tracked him this far. I know how to stay alive. He hesitated, then added, It's you I'm concerned about. If Reeves notices your questions, you could be in danger. The thought had occurred to Josephine as well. If Samuel had indeed murdered Matthew, he might not hesitate to silence a suspicious widow. I'll be cautious, she promised, but I can't simply hide away, not if there's a chance to clear my name and bring Matthew's killer to justice. Adam studied her for a moment, seeming to reassess his initial impression. You're braver than most, Mrs. Zachary. Not brave, she corrected him. Just tired of living under a cloud of suspicion for something I didn't do. A twig snapped somewhere in the trees beyond them, and both froze. Adam placed a warning hand on Josephine's arm, signaling her to remain silent as he scanned the woods. After a tense moment, a deer bounded away through the underbrush. We should go, Adam said quietly. Meet me here again tomorrow, same time. I'll tell you what I find at the claim site. Josephine nodded, suddenly conscious of his hand still resting lightly on her arm. He seemed to realize it at the same moment and withdrew it, clearing his throat. Tomorrow, then, she agreed, collecting her still empty basket. They parted ways, Adam leading his horse deeper into the trees while Josephine returned to her cabin. The encounter had been brief but productive and surprisingly comforting. For weeks, she'd faced her ordeal alone. Now, unexpectedly, she had an ally. That evening, Josephine finally opened her sister's letter. Jane lived in Philadelphia with her husband and children, a world away from the harsh realities of frontier life. Her letter was full of family news and concerned inquiries about Josephine's well-being. News of Matthew's death had reached her, though clearly not the surrounding suspicions. Josephine sat at her small writing desk and began a careful reply, sharing her grief, but not the town's accusations or her current dangerous investigation. Jane would only worry, and there was nothing she could do from so far away. Better to wait until the truth was revealed one way or another. As darkness fell, Josephine prepared for bed with a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. Grief for Matthew remained a constant ache, but it was now joined by determination, fear, and something else, a tentative connection to Adam Everett that she wasn't quite ready to examine. She blew out her lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds outside her window. For the first time in weeks, she didn't cry herself to sleep. The next morning brought unexpected complications. Josephine had just finished her breakfast when a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Sheriff Miller standing on her porch again, his expression more severe than usual. Mrs. Zachary, he said without greeting, I need to ask you some questions about your activities yesterday. Josephine's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained a calm facade. Of course, Sheriff. What about yesterday? You were seen speaking with Samuel Reeves at the general store, asking questions about your husband's mining claim. Then later, you met with that cattleman, Everett, at the edge of your property. His eyes narrowed. Care to explain? Someone had been watching her. The realization sent a chill down Josephine's spine. I don't see that either of those things requires explanation, Sheriff. Mr. Reeves was helping Matthew with a claim before he died. As his widow, I have an interest in understanding what happened to it. And Everett. What's your interest in him? Josephine thought quickly. Mr. Everett's cattle are grazing near my property. He wanted to ensure they wouldn't disturb my garden or chickens. It was a simple courtesy call. Sheriff Miller's skeptical expression made it clear he didn't believe her. Mrs. Zachary, I warned you about keeping to yourself. Now I find you asking questions all over town and meeting secretly with strangers. There was nothing secret about our meeting, Josephine protested. We spoke in broad daylight on my own property. Be that as it may, the sheriff continued, I'm here to give you fair warning. There's talk in town about asking you to leave Tonopah Junction. Folks are uncomfortable with your presence, especially now that you seem to be stirring up trouble. The threat hit Josephine like a physical blow. Leave. This was her home, the place she and Matthew had built together. Everything she had was here. On what grounds? She demanded, anger finally breaking through her careful composure. I've been accused of nothing, charged with nothing. You can't force me from my own property based on gossip and suspicion. Sheriff Miller sighed, having the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. No one wants to force anything, Mrs. Zachary, but a community has ways of making itself clear. I'm just suggesting you might consider selling up and moving somewhere fresh, for your own sake. I will not be driven from my home by unfounded accusations, Josephine said firmly. And I would remind you, Sheriff, that your job is to uphold the law, not enforce the whims of gossips. The sheriff's face hardened. Just watch your step, Mrs. Zachary, and I'd advise you to stay away from Everett. Man's asking a lot of questions for someone just passing through with cattle. He touched the brim of his hat. Good day to you. After he left, Josephine closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. This complicated matters significantly. Not only were her movements being observed, but the town's hostility was reaching a dangerous peak. And now the sheriff was suspicious of Adam as well. She needed to warn him, but their planned meeting was hours away. Pacing her small front room, Josephine considered her options. She could wait and hope Adam remained unaware of the increased scrutiny, or she could try to find him sooner. Decision made, Josephine changed into her riding habit, something she hadn't worn since before Matthew's death. The dark blue skirt and jacket were practical for horseback, though she'd have preferred trousers for true comfort. Such impropriety would only give the town more to gossip about, however. Her mare, Lily, nickered in greeting when Josephine entered the small stable behind her cabin. The horse had been neglected in recent weeks, receiving only basic care as Josephine struggled through her grief. I'm sorry, girl, she murmured, stroking Lily's neck as she saddled her. We both need this ride, I think. Mounted, Josephine took a roundabout path away from town, heading first west before circling north toward where Adam had said his cattle were grazing. It was a risk, seeking him out so openly, but the sheriff's warning had changed the stakes. Adam needed to know they were being watched. She rode for nearly an hour before spotting cattle in the distance, grazing in a lush valley between rolling hills. Several cowboys were visible, keeping watch over the herd. Josephine approached cautiously, scanning for Adam's familiar figure. One of the men noticed her and rode to intercept, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. He was older, with a weathered face and graying hair beneath his hat. Madam, he called as he neared. This is private grazing land. Can I help you with something? I'm looking for Mr. Everett, Josephine replied. It's a matter of some urgency. The man studied her with shrewd eyes. You'd be the widow woman from town. Mrs. Zachary, isn't it? Josephine nodded, surprised and somewhat alarmed that her identity was known. Yes, is Mr. Everett here? Boss rode out early to check some land to the north, the man said. I'm his foreman, Frank Wilson. Whatever message you have, I can see he gets it. Josephine hesitated, unsure how much this man knew about Adam's true purpose in Tonopah Junction. "When do you expect him back?" Frank shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be hours yet." He must have seen her disappointment because his expression softened slightly. "Look, madam, I don't know what business you have with Adam, but he's a good man. If he's helping you with something, he has his reasons." The statement confirmed that Frank knew at least something of Adam's purpose. "Mr. Wilson, could you tell him that the sheriff came to see me this morning? He knows about our meeting yesterday, and he's warning me to stay away from Mr. Everett." Frank's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Well, that complicates things." He glanced back at the herd, then to Josephine again. "I'll make sure he gets the message right away. You'd best head back before you're missed in town." Josephine nodded her thanks and turned Lily toward home, feeling both relieved and frustrated. She delivered her warning but missed the chance to speak with Adam directly. Now she could only hope he'd be cautious in his investigation. Halfway back to her cabin, Josephine made an impulsive decision. Instead of returning home, she guided Lily toward the location Matthew had described in his journal north of the old Wilson claim. If Adam was investigating the site, perhaps she could find him there. The terrain grew rougher as she rode north, scrubby pine trees dotting the landscape. Matthew had described a narrow valley with a creek running through it, surrounded by rocky outcroppings. According to his journal, the silver vein was visible in the rock face on the valley's eastern side. After another half-hour of riding, Josephine spotted a valley that matched the description. She approached cautiously, dismounting and tethering Lily to a tree at the ridge above. On foot, she made her way down the steep slope, mindful of loose rocks that might betray her presence. The valley below was alive with activity. Several men were working at what appeared to be a freshly established mining operation, tent set up, equipment arranged, and work already begun on the rock face Matthew had described. Josephine crouched behind a boulder, observing from her hidden vantage point. She recognized two of the men immediately: Samuel Reeves and Harold Blackwell, the mine foreman. There was no sign of Blackwell's nephew, the supposed new claim owner. Instead, Samuel appeared to be directing operations with the confidence of someone in charge. Movement from the north end of the valley caught Josephine's attention. A rider was approaching slowly, keeping to the tree line Adam. He dismounted and tethered his horse in a similar fashion to how Josephine had secured Lily, then began making his way cautiously down the slope on the opposite side of the valley. Josephine held her breath, watching as Adam positioned himself behind an outcropping, observing the mining operation just as she was doing. Neither was aware of the other's presence. For nearly 20 minutes, Josephine remained hidden, watching both the miners and Adam. Samuel and Blackwell appeared to be in high spirits, examining rock samples and consulting a map spread on a makeshift table. Their voices didn't carry to her position, but their body language suggested excitement about the find. Adam, meanwhile, had produced a small spyglass from his pocket and was studying the operation intently. Josephine could see his face clearly enough to note his grim expression as he took in the scene below. She was so focused on Adam that she nearly missed the approach of a rider from the direction of town. By the time she noticed, it was too late to warn him. Sheriff Miller rode into the valley, dismounting near Samuel and Blackwell. Josephine strained to hear their conversation but caught only fragments carried on the breeze, checking on progress. The sheriff was saying. Samuel replied something inaudible, then pointed toward the rock face where men were working. The three men walked in that direction, their backs to both Josephine and Adam's hiding places. Taking advantage of their distraction, Josephine began carefully working her way around the ridge, trying to get closer to Adam's position without exposing herself. It was slow, painstaking work, but eventually she managed to close the distance enough to risk a soft whistle. Adam's head snapped in her direction, eyes widening in surprise when he spotted her. He frowned and made a sharp gesture, clearly telling her to leave. Josephine shook her head stubbornly and pointed toward the valley, mouthing "Sheriff" to ensure he'd noticed Miller's presence. Adam nodded his understanding, then gestured again for her to retreat. This time, Josephine reluctantly complied, knowing that her presence only increased the danger for both of them. She carefully made her way back to where Lily waited, mounted, and rode a safe distance away before stopping to wait for Adam. It was nearly an hour before he appeared, riding hard in her direction. His expression was thunderous as he reined in beside her. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" "If they'd spotted you, I came to warn you about the sheriff," Josephine interrupted. "He visited me this morning, knew about our meeting yesterday. Someone's watching us." Adam's anger deflated slightly. "I got your message from Frank. Came out here anyway, needed to see for myself what they were doing." He ran a hand over his face. "You shouldn't have followed me." "This concerns me as much as you," Josephine reminded him. "Matthew died because of that claim. I have a right to be involved." They stared at each other for a long moment, neither willing to back down. Finally, Adam sighed. "You're right, but we need to be more careful. The stakes just got higher." "What did you see down there?" Josephine asked. "Plenty," Adam replied grimly. "That's no ordinary silver find, it's exceptional. Rich enough to kill for, certainly. And Reeves is clearly in charge, despite what he told you about Blackwell's nephew owning the claim. And the sheriff seems to be in on it," Adam said. "At least enough to be keeping an eye on the operation. Don't know if he knows the full truth about Reeves, but he's compromised either way." The revelation didn't entirely surprise Josephine. Sheriff Miller's eagerness to see her leave town made more sense if he was involved in Samuel's schemes. "What do we do now?" she asked. Adam glanced at the sun, which was beginning its western descent. "Now we get you home before anyone realizes you've been gone. Tonight after dark, I'll come to your cabin. We need to make plans." "That's too risky," Josephine protested. "If someone's watching my property, I'll be careful," Adam assured her. "But we need somewhere private to talk, and your cabin is the only option. I can't bring you to my camp, too many eyes." Reluctantly, Josephine agreed. They parted ways, Adam heading back to his herd while Josephine returned to her cabin, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. The rest of the day passed with agonizing slowness. Josephine went about her usual routines, all while watching the road for any sign of surveillance. As darkness fell, she lit lamps in her front room as normal, then extinguished all but one in the kitchen at the back of the house. There, she waited, jumping at every sound outside. It was well past 10 o'clock when a soft knock came at her back door. Josephine opened it to find Adam, his face shadowed beneath his hat. "Anyone follow you?" she asked as he slipped inside. "Don't think so," he replied, removing his hat. Took a roundabout approach through the trees. Josephine gestured for him to sit at her small kitchen table while she poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot she'd kept warm on the stove. They sat across from each other, speaking in hushed tones despite being alone. "I've been thinking about what we saw today," Adam began. "The operation at the claim site is moving quickly, too quickly for normal prospecting. They know exactly where the silver is, and they're extracting it at a pace that suggests they don't plan to stay long." "You think they'll take what they can and leave?" Josephine asked. Adam nodded. "That's Riggs's pattern. He identifies a rich claim, arranges for the original discoverer to have an accident, works the claim just long enough to extract the easiest wealth, then disappears before anyone catches on. He's done it at least 3 times that I know of. And the sheriff. Where does he fit in? My guess is he gets a cut for looking the other way, maybe for helping pressure witnesses or suspects to leave town. Adam gave her a pointed look, like he's trying to do with you. Josephine wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. So what can we do? If the sheriff is involved, we can't exactly bring him evidence. No, Adam agreed. But there's a federal marshal who passes through the area occasionally. Frank tells me he's due in Carson City within the week. If we can compile enough evidence of Riggs's identity and crimes, the marshal would have authority to arrest him, sheriff or no sheriff. What kind of evidence would be convincing enough? Ideally, something that proves Reeves is actually Riggs. Distinctive scars, documents in his possession, testimony from someone who knew him in Arizona. Adam frowned thoughtfully. I have a wanted poster with a decent likeness, but it's not foolproof. What about evidence connecting him to Matthew's death? Josephine asked, the question that had been haunting her. Adam's expression softened. That's harder, Josephine. If he did poison your husband, he was clever about it, using mushrooms that could have been gathered innocently. Without a confession, it would be difficult to prove. Then we need a confession, Josephine said simply. Adam stared at her. You can't be serious. Approaching Riggs directly would be suicide. Not necessarily, Josephine argued. He thinks I'm just a grieving widow whom everyone suspects of murder. He has no reason to believe I suspect him. An idea was forming in her mind, dangerous but potentially effective. What if I approached him, said I found something of Matthew's that might interest him, something about the claim? Absolutely not, Adam said firmly. I won't let you put yourself in danger like that. Let me. Josephine repeated, arching an eyebrow. Mr. Everett, I appreciate your concern, but this is my fight too. Matthew was my husband. They faced off across the table, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Adam spoke again, his voice softer. I understand your need for justice, Josephine. Believe me, I do, but there are other ways, safer ways to get what we need. He reached across the table, his hand coming to rest near hers without quite touching it. I've been tracking Riggs for months. I won't lose him now, and I certainly won't risk your safety in the process. The genuine concern in his eyes touched something in Josephine, a place she'd thought closed off by grief. She was suddenly, uncomfortably aware of Adam as a man, not just an ally in her quest for justice. Pulling her hand back slightly, she nodded. Very well. What do you suggest instead? Adam seemed to notice her subtle withdrawal and straightened in his chair. Tomorrow night, Riggs usually drinks at the saloon after work. I could approach him, see if he recognizes me from Arizona. Would that be safe for you? Josephine asked. I never met him directly back then, Adam explained. I only started tracking him after he'd left Arizona. He might have heard my name in connection with his crimes, but he's never seen my face. They spent the next hour discussing potential approaches, weighing risks against likely outcomes. As the clock on Josephine's mantel struck midnight, Adam rose to leave. I should go before anyone notices a light still burning in your kitchen at this hour, he said. Josephine nodded and walked him to the door. Be careful tomorrow, she warned. Samuel may seem like a harmless clerk, but if he's killed before. I'll be careful, Adam promised. He hesitated at the threshold, then added quietly, You've shown remarkable courage through all this, Josephine. Matthew would be proud. The simple statement, delivered with sincere admiration, caught Josephine off guard. Tears sprang to her eyes unexpectedly. Thank you, she whispered. After Adam left, Josephine stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching the moonlit path he'd taken through the trees. His words about Matthew had pierced her in a way she hadn't anticipated. In all the weeks of suspicion and isolation, No one had spoken of her husband with anything but suspicion or pity. Adam's acknowledgement of Matthew's pride in her strength felt like a balm to her wounded soul. Yet mixed with that comfort was a new, unsettling awareness of Adam himself. His steady presence, his determination to see justice done, the gentle concern in his eyes when he'd warned against her dangerous plan, all had awakened feelings she wasn't prepared to confront. Josephine extinguished the kitchen lamp and made her way to bed, her mind churning with plans and possibilities, both for bringing Samuel Reeves to justice and for navigating the unexpected emotions Adam Everett had stirred within her. The next day dawned with leaden skies that matched Josephine's apprehension. She went about her morning chores mechanically, her mind occupied with what would happen that evening when Adam confronted Samuel at the saloon. By midday, the threatening clouds had delivered on their promise, rain falling in steady sheets that drummed on Josephine's roof. She was mending a tear in one of Matthew's old shirts, unable to part with his clothing, despite knowing he'd never wear it again when a knock at her door startled her. Placing aside her sewing, Josephine approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Abigail Murray," came the reply. "Let me in before I drown out here, Josephine." Surprised, Josephine opened the door to find the postmistress standing on her porch, rain dripping from her oilskin coat. "Abigail, what brings you out in this weather?" Josephine asked as she ushered the older woman inside. "News," Abigail said grimly, removing her wet coat, "and not the good kind." Josephine felt her stomach tighten with dread. "What's happened?" Abigail moved to the fire, warming her hands before turning to face Josephine. "There's talk in town, Josephine. Serious talk. The town council met this morning and there's talk of formally asking you to leave Tonopah Junction by the end of the month." Although the sheriff had warned of this possibility, hearing that it was actually happening hit Josephine hard. "They can't do that," she said, though without much conviction. "I've broken no laws." "It's not about laws," Abigail said quietly. "It's about that husband of yours and his silver find. The one Samuel Reeves and Harold Blackwell are working now." Josephine stared at her. "You know about that?" "I know many things," Abigail said. "People talk freely around an old widow who sorts their mail. Most times I keep what I hear to myself, but this—" She shook her head. "This isn't right, what they're doing to you." "What exactly do you know?" Josephine asked carefully. Abigail's sharp eyes studied her. "I know that Matthew found a rich vein of silver and told Samuel about it. I know Matthew died suddenly after that. And I know Samuel and Harold have been working that claim like men possessed, pulling out ore at a rate that suggests they're in a mighty hurry. Do you think—" Josephine couldn't finish the question. "That Samuel had something to do with Matthew's death?" Abigail finished for her. "I don't know, but I do know Samuel Reeves isn't who he claims to be." Josephine's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Abigail lowered her voice, though they were alone in the cabin. "About a month ago, a letter came for Samuel. Return address was Tucson, Arizona. The envelope tore a bit in transit, and I couldn't help noticing it was addressed to S. Riggs or S. Reeves." "Samuel Riggs," Josephine breathed. Adam had been right. "You don't seem surprised," Abigail observed shrewdly. "I had my suspicions," Josephine admitted. "What else do you know about him?" Abigail shook her head. "Not much. But I've been watching since that letter came, and I've noticed things. The way he watches newcomers to town like he's afraid of being recognized. The way he and Harold whisper together when they think no one's looking." She paused. "And the way Sheriff Miller turns a blind eye to it all." "Abigail, why are you telling me this now?" Josephine asked. "Because they mean to run you out of town before the end of the month, and I don't think you should go quietly." Abigail's weathered face creased with determination. "Matthew was a good man. He deserved better than what happened to him, and you deserve better than being blamed for it." Josephine felt a surge of gratitude toward the older woman. "Thank you," she said softly. "It means more than you know to hear someone say that." "So," Abigail said, straightening her shoulders, "what are we going to do about it?" Though we caught Josephine by surprise. "We?" "Yes, we," Abigail insisted. "You don't think I'm going to sit by and let them drive you out, do you? I may be old, but I'm not useless." She fixed Josephine with a stern look. "And don't tell me you don't have a plan already. I've seen that cattleman Everett asking questions around town. I'm guessing he's helping you." Josephine hesitated, uncertain how much to share. Abigail had just proven herself an ally, but caution was still warranted. "Adam believes Samuel Reeves is actually Samuel Riggs, wanted for similar crimes in Arizona," she said finally. "He's been tracking him for months." "I knew it," Abigail exclaimed. "The moment I saw that letter, I suspected something wasn't right. So what's your plan? How do we expose him?" Before Josephine could answer, another knock came at the door, this one more urgent. Exchanging alarmed glances with Abigail, Josephine moved to answer it. Adam stood on her porch, rain streaming from his hat and coat. His expression was grim. "We have a problem," he said, then noticed Abigail inside. "Mrs. Murray," he acknowledged, looking questioningly at Josephine. "It's all right," Josephine assured him. "Abigail knows about Samuel. She's here to help." She stepped aside to let Adam enter. "What's happened?" Adam removed his dripping hat, nodding respectfully to Abigail before turning to Josephine. "Riggs knows I'm looking into him. Someone must have overheard our conversation or seen us meeting." "How do you know?" Josephine asked, fear gripping her. "Frank overheard him talking with Sheriff Miller at the mining camp this morning. They mentioned me by name, said I was asking too many questions. Miller promised to handle it." "What does that mean?" Josephine demanded. "It means the sheriff will likely try to run me out of town or worse," Adam said grimly. "And it means our timeline just got a lot shorter. We need to act tonight." "What about the federal marshal?" Josephine asked. "I thought the plan was to wait for him." Adam shook his head. "No time. Frank says Miller sent a deputy to intercept the marshal before he reaches Carson City, probably to feed him lies about me causing trouble. If we're going to expose Riggs, it has to be now, before Miller can interfere." Abigail, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "I might be able to help with that. The letter I mentioned, the one addressed to Riggs, I kept it. The torn part with both names visible. Would that help establish his identity?" Adam turned to her with renewed interest. "It could be exactly what we need. Evidence of his dual identity would support everything else we've gathered." "It's in my desk at the post office," Abigail said. "I can retrieve it easily enough." "Not alone," Adam cautioned. "If Riggs' suspects were onto him, it could be dangerous. I'll accompany you back to town." "And me?" Josephine asked, unwilling to be left behind. Adam and Abigail exchanged glances. "It's too risky for you to be seen with us in town," Adam said gently. "If Miller's looking for an excuse to move against you sooner." "I'm already being forced to leave by the end of the month," Josephine countered. "What more can they do?" "A lot," Abigail said darkly. "False accusations have a way of turning ugly fast in places like Tonopah Junction." "She's right," Adam agreed. "The safest place for you is here, Josephine. Once we have the letter, we'll return immediately." Josephine wanted to argue but knew they were right. Her presence would only complicate an already dangerous situation. "Very well," she conceded reluctantly. "But be careful, both of you." "We will," Adam promised. He hesitated, then reached out to squeeze her hand briefly. "This will be over soon, Josephine, one way or another." The simple gesture of reassurance sent warmth spreading through Josephine's fingers. She nodded, unable to trust her voice in that moment. After Adam and Abigail departed, Josephine moved restlessly around her cabin, unable to settle to any task. The rain continued its steady drumming on the roof, adding to her sense of foreboding. She found herself at Matthew's chest again, running her fingers over his journal, seeking some connection to him in this moment of uncertainty. Nearly an hour passed before Josephine heard approaching hoofbeats. Rushing to the window, she saw Adam returning alone, riding hard through the rain. She met him at the door, alarmed by his expression. "What happened? Where's Abigail?" she demanded as he entered, water streaming from his coat. "She's safe," Adam assured her, shrugging off his wet garments. "We got the letter, but there were complications. Sheriff Miller was at the post office when we arrived. Did he suspect anything?" Adam shook his head. "Abigail was brilliant, told him she needed help moving some heavy mail bags, asked me to assist since I happened to be passing by. But while we were there, we overheard Miller telling his deputy that they're planning to move against you tonight." "Tonight?" Josephine echoed, fear constricting her throat. "What do you mean, move against me?" "From what we gathered, Miller plans to bring a group to your cabin after dark, claiming they're going to formally serve you with notice to leave town. But Abigail thinks there's more to it." Adam's expression darkened. "She believes they intend to frighten you into leaving immediately, possibly by threatening to burn you out." "They wouldn't dare," Josephine gasped, though uncertainty colored her voice. "I wouldn't put anything past Miller and Riggs at this point," Adam said grimly. "They're desperate to finish extracting the richest ore before moving on. Your presence is a complication they want gone." "What do we do?" Josephine asked, striving to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. Adam moved to the window, checking the position of the sun through the rain clouds. "It's nearly 4 o'clock. They won't move until after dark. That gives us a few hours to prepare." "Prepare how? We can't fight the entire town." "Not the entire town," Adam corrected her. "Just Miller, Riggs, and their close allies. And we're not without resources." He turned back to her. "Abigail is spreading the word to those she trusts about Riggs's true identity and the letter proving it. And Frank is bringing some of my men into position around your property just in case." Josephine stared at him. "Your men? Adam, this isn't their fight." "They've been with me since Arizona," Adam said simply. "They know why I've been tracking Riggs, and they're not the type to stand aside while a lady is threatened." His unwavering support touched Josephine deeply. In just a few days, this man had become her most steadfast ally, risking his own safety to help her find justice for Matthew and clear her name. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know how I can ever repay you for this." Adam's expression softened. "There's no debt between us, Josephine. I came to Tonopah Junction seeking justice for my friend. You're seeking the same for your husband. Our purposes aligned, that's all." But even as he spoke, Josephine sensed there was more to it than that for both of them. The connection that had formed between them transcended their mutual goal of exposing Samuel Riggs. It was something neither had sought but which had grown nonetheless, tender and unexpected amidst the danger and grief. Before she could respond, Adam returned to the practical matter at hand. "We should prepare for tonight. Is there somewhere you could go if things turn ugly? Somewhere safe?" Josephine shook her head. "This is my home, Adam. I won't be driven from it by threats and intimidation." Her voice strengthened with determination. "If they come tonight, I'll face them." Adam studied her for a long moment, respect evident in his gaze. "Very well, but we'll take precautions. First, I want you to pack a bag with essentials just in case a quick departure becomes necessary. Then we'll secure the cabin as best we can." For the next few hours, they worked together preparing for the confrontation to come. Adam checked and reinforced doors and windows while Josephine gathered her most precious belongings into a small valise. Matthew's journal, their wedding photograph, her mother's silver locket, and essential clothing. As darkness fell, Adam's men arrived quietly, taking positions in the trees surrounding the cabin. Frank reported that Abigail had successfully spread word about Samuel's true identity to several respected townspeople, creating doubt about the sheriff's intentions. "Some of them might even come out to support you," Frank told Josephine. "Mrs. Murray's quite persuasive when she sets her mind to it." The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a damp, misty evening. Josephine prepared a simple supper for Adam and Frank, more out of a need to keep busy than from actual hunger. None of them had much appetite as they waited, tension building with each passing hour. It was just past 9 o'clock when they heard the approach of multiple horses. Adam moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains. "At least 6 riders," he reported. "Miller's in front with Riggs beside him. Blackwell's there too, and 3 others I don't recognize." Josephine's heart pounded as she joined Adam at the window. "What about townspeople? Did any come to support us?" "Not yet," Adam said grimly. "But Frank's men are in position. Whatever happens, you're not alone, Josephine." She nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. "What's our plan?" "We let them state their business," Adam said. "If it's just the eviction notice, we accept it calmly but firmly refuse to leave immediately if they push." He left the implication hanging. "And if they mention you or show hostility, then we reveal what we know about Riggs," Adam said. "The letter proves he's not who he claims to be." That might be enough to create doubt among the others with Miller. The riders had reached her front yard now, spreading out in a semicircle facing the cabin. Sheriff Miller dismounted and approached the porch, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Mrs. Zachary," he called. "I need to speak with you. Town business." Adam squeezed Josephine's hand briefly. "Remember, I'm right here with you," he murmured. Drawing a deep breath, Josephine moved to the door and opened it, standing framed in the doorway with the light from the cabin illuminating her. She kept her expression neutral, betraying none of the fear and anger roiling within her. "Sheriff Miller," she acknowledged. "It's rather late for a social call." "This isn't social," Miller replied. "I'm here on official business. The town council has voted, and I'm serving you formal notice to vacate Tonopah Junction." "I see," Josephine said calmly. "And does this official business require 6 armed men in my yard after dark?" Miller's eyes narrowed at her composure. "Just ensuring the notice is delivered properly." "You have until the end of the month to make arrangements." "Actually," came a new voice from the darkness, "I believe there are some matters that need clarification before any notices are served." Abigail Murray emerged from the shadows beyond the yard, and she wasn't alone. Behind her came several townspeople, at least a dozen men and women Josephine recognized, including Dr. Phillips, who had treated Matthew in his final days. "Mrs. Murray," Sheriff Miller said, clearly surprised by the intervention. "This doesn't concern you or these good folks." "Official town business, as I said." "Oh, but it does concern us," Abigail replied sharply. "When the town council votes to expel one of our own based on suspicion rather than proof, it concerns every one of us." She stepped forward, addressing the gathered crowd rather than just Miller. "Especially when that suspicion might be deliberately misdirected." Samuel Reeves, still mounted on his horse, shifted uncomfortably. "What is she talking about, Sheriff? Let's just deliver the notice and be done with it." "Mrs. Murray is referring to some wild accusations about your identity, Reeves," Miller said with forced casualness. "Nothing worth listening to." "Not wild accusations," Adam said, stepping into the doorway beside Josephine. "Documented fact." There was a murmur among both groups as Adam moved forward to stand on the porch. Frank and two other cowboys emerged from the shadows to flank the cabin, making it clear that Josephine had more support than Miller had anticipated. "Who the hell are you to interfere in town business?" Miller demanded, his hand now resting more obviously on his pistol. "Adam Everett," he replied evenly. "Cattle rancher from Arizona Territory, where this man," he pointed at Samuel, "is known as Samuel Riggs, wanted for claim jumping and the murder of 2 minors." The accusation created a stir among the townspeople who had arrived with Abigail. Samuel's face had drained of color, though he maintained a facade of indignation. "That's absurd," he sputtered. "Sheriff, are you going to allow these slanderous accusations? We have proof," Abigail said firmly. She turned to the gathered townspeople. "Many of you have known me for years. You know I don't speak without certainty." She removed a folded paper from her pocket. "This letter came through my post office addressed to S. Riggs or S. Reeves, the same man, using 2 different names. Dr." Phillips stepped forward, taking the letter and examining it under the light of a lantern someone had brought. "It does appear to be addressed as Mrs. Murray claims," he confirmed, showing it to others nearby. Samuel was now visibly sweating despite the cool evening air. "A simple misunderstanding. A friend who knew me by a childhood nickname, perhaps. A coincidence, surely," Sheriff Miller added quickly. "This changes nothing about our business here tonight." "I believe it changes everything," Josephine said, finding her voice at last. She moved to stand beside Adam on the porch steps. "For weeks, this town has suspected me of poisoning my husband. But what if Matthew's death wasn't an accident at all, but murder committed by a man with a history of killing to steal valuable claims?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Samuel's composure cracked further, his eyes darting between the hostile faces now turned toward him. "This is outrageous," he blustered. "Sheriff, I won't stand for this." But Miller was looking increasingly uncertain, sensing the shift in the crowd's mood. Blackwell, who had remained silent until now, edged his horse away from Samuel's, perhaps recognizing which way the wind was blowing. "There's an easy way to resolve this," Adam said. "I have a wanted poster from Arizona with Samuel Riggs's likeness. Striking resemblance to Mr. Reeves here, wouldn't you say, Sheriff?" Miller didn't answer, his gaze shifting between Samuel and the increasingly suspicious townspeople. "And there's more," Abigail added. "Dr. Phillips, you examined Matthew Zachary after his death. Did you consider the possibility that the mushroom poisoning might have been deliberately administered?" The doctor frowned thoughtfully. "I assumed it was accidental, the mushrooms gathered mistakenly. But," he looked at Josephine apologetically, "given the circumstances and Mrs. Zachary's well-known cooking skills, it did seem odd that such a mistake would occur." "Matthew didn't gather those mushrooms," Josephine said clearly, the realization striking her with sudden certainty. "He knew the difference between edible and poisonous varieties his mother had taught him well. Samuel brought them that night, claiming he'd found them near the new claim site." All eyes turned to Samuel, whose face now showed naked panic. With a sudden movement, he wheeled his horse around and dug in his spurs, bolting away from the confrontation. "Stop him!" Adam shouted, but it was Blackwell, surprisingly, who reacted first, reaching out to grab Samuel's reins as he passed. The 2 men grappled briefly before Samuel drew a concealed pistol. The shot that rang out echoed across the clearing, and Blackwell fell from his horse with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Sheriff Miller drew his weapon, though whether to pursue Samuel or threaten Adam wasn't immediately clear. Frank and his cowboys had their guns out too, while the townspeople scattered for cover. "Get inside." Adam urged Josephine, pushing her toward the cabin door, but she resisted, unwilling to hide while others faced danger on her behalf. In the confusion, Samuel had gained ground, galloping toward the trees at the edge of Josephine's property. Adam sprinted for his own horse, tethered nearby, clearly intending to give chase. "Adam, wait," Josephine called, but he was already mounting, determination etched on his features. "Stay with Frank," he called back. "I won't let Riggs escape justice again." Before Josephine could protest further, Adam spurred his horse after Samuel, both riders disappearing into the darkness beyond her property. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Phillips tended to Blackwell's wound, which proved painful but not life-threatening. Sheriff Miller, faced with overwhelming evidence and public opinion, reluctantly organized a search party to assist in locating Samuel. Blackwell, perhaps hoping to save himself, confessed that he had known Samuel wasn't using his real name but claimed ignorance about the murders in Arizona. He admitted they had been working Matthew's claim illegally, with Miller taking a percentage for looking the other way. "But I swear I didn't know anything about poisoning Matthew," Blackwell insisted weakly as Dr. Phillips bandaged his shoulder. "That was all Riggs's idea. Said it would look like an accident and suspicion would fall on Mrs. Zachary if anyone questioned it." His confession, witnessed by numerous townspeople, effectively cleared Josephine's name. One by one, neighbors who had shunned her for weeks approached with awkward apologies and expressions of support. The vindication should have brought relief, but Josephine could focus on nothing but Adam's absence as the night wore on with no sign of his return. Frank stayed close, his weathered face betraying his own concern for his employer and friend. "Adam's a good tracker," he reassured Josephine. "And he's been hunting Riggs a long time. He won't give up easily." "That's what worries me," Josephine replied softly. "Samuel is desperate and armed if Adam corners him alone." Dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains when they finally heard a horse approaching. Josephine, who had been sitting on her porch despite the chill morning air, rose to her feet as Adam rode into view. He was alone, his face grim with exhaustion, a dark stain visible on his shirt sleeve. "Adam," Josephine hurried to meet him as he dismounted stiffly. "You're hurt." "It's just a graze," he said dismissively, though his wince as she touched his arm suggested otherwise. "Riggs is a better shot than I gave him credit for." "Did you find him?" Frank asked, approaching with a canteen of water that Adam accepted gratefully. Adam nodded, taking a long drink before answering. "Found him, cornered him in a box canyon about 5 miles north. He chose to fight rather than surrender." A shadow crossed his face. "He won't harm anyone else." Josephine understood the implication. Samuel Riggs, the man who had murdered her husband and others, was dead. She should have felt satisfaction, or at least relief, but instead found herself examining Adam's face with concern. "Come inside," she said gently. "Let me tend to that wound." Adam followed her into the cabin, the events of the night evident in the slump of his shoulders and the weariness in his eyes. As Josephine cleaned and bandaged his arm, they spoke quietly about all that had happened: Blackwell's confession, the sheriff's reluctant cooperation, the town's sudden change of heart toward Josephine. "Your name is cleared," Adam said, watching her work on his injury. "You can stay in Tonopah Junction now, rebuild your life here." Josephine secured the bandage with steady hands, considering his words. "I'm not sure I want to stay," she admitted. "There are too many memories here, good and bad. And despite their apologies, I'll always be the widow who was suspected of murder." "Where would you go?" Adam asked carefully, something unreadable in his expression. Before Josephine could answer, Frank appeared in the doorway. "Sheriff's here with news," he announced. Miller entered behind Frank, his demeanor markedly different from the previous night, humbled by his complicity in Samuel's crimes being exposed. "Mrs. Zachary," he began awkwardly, "I've come to inform you officially that all suspicions against you have been withdrawn. The town council has revoked the eviction notice." "Thank you, Sheriff," Josephine replied coolly. Miller cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's more. We found papers in Riggs's room at the boarding house. Seems he had documents prepared to transfer ownership of your husband's claim to himself once you left town. So even the legal filing was fraudulent," Adam noted. Miller nodded reluctantly. "The claim rightfully belongs to Mrs. Zachary as Matthew's widow. It's quite valuable by all accounts." The news should have been welcome, but Josephine felt only a hollow ache. The silver claim that had cost Matthew his life was now hers, a bitter inheritance. "Is that all, Sheriff?" she asked, her voice betraying her exhaustion. "Just one more thing," Miller said, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "There will be an official inquest into Riggs's death, but given the circumstances and the evidence of his crimes, it will be ruled self-defense. No charges will be brought against Mr. Everett." After Miller left, Josephine and Adam sat in silence for a long moment. The cabin was quiet now, with Frank and the other cowboys having returned to their camp. Outside, the new day had fully dawned, sunlight streaming through the windows. "What will you do now?" Josephine finally asked. "Return to Arizona?" Adam shook his head slowly. "The herd still needs to be delivered north after that." He trailed off, studying her face. "After that, I'm not sure. For so long, tracking Riggs was my purpose, now that it's done." "You could go home," Josephine suggested, though something in her rebelled against the thought of him leaving. "Home," Adam repeated thoughtfully. "My ranch in Arizona has been managed by my foreman for months. It's there waiting, but—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Josephine, these past days have shown me something I didn't expect to find in Tonopah Junction." "What's that?" she asked, her heart suddenly beating faster. "A reason to consider a different future," he said simply. "I came here seeking justice for my friend, but I found something more, someone who shares my sense of right and wrong, who faces adversity with courage I can only admire." Josephine felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "Adam, I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted gently. "I know you're still grieving Matthew, and that's as it should be. I just want you to know that when you decide where you'll go from here, you don't have to go alone." The offer hung between them, delicate and profound. Josephine looked at this man who had appeared in her darkest hour and stood beside her without judgment, who had risked his life to bring her husband's killer to justice. "I loved Matthew deeply," she said softly. "His death left a hole in my life I never thought could be filled." "I would never presume to replace him," Adam assured her. "No," Josephine agreed, "but perhaps, in time, there might be room for a new chapter." She met his gaze directly. "I don't know what the future holds, Adam, but I do know I'm not ready to say goodbye to you yet." A smile, the first genuine one she'd seen from him, transformed Adam's face. "Then we'll take it one day at a time," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Starting today." 2 months later, Josephine stood on the porch of her cabin, watching as workers loaded the last of her belongings onto a wagon. The summer sun beat down on Tonopah Junction, the distant mountains shimmering in the heat. "Everything's packed, Mrs. Zachary," called the foreman of the moving crew. "We're ready when you are." "Thank you," Josephine replied. "I'll be just a moment." She turned to take a final look at the cabin that had been her home with Matthew. After much consideration, she had decided to sell both the property and her interest in the silver claim. The money would provide a fresh start elsewhere, free from the painful memories that lingered in Tonopah Junction despite the community's belated support. Abigail Murray approached, her eyes misty as she embraced Josephine. "I still wish you'd reconsider," the older woman said. "The town's not the same without you." "It's time for me to move forward," Josephine said gently, "but I'll write often, I promise." "You'd better," Abigail warned, then smiled. "Though I expect you'll be too busy with that handsome rancher of yours to remember an old woman back in Nevada." Josephine laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "Adam is not my rancher, Abigail. He's a friend who's kindly offered to help me relocate." "Hum," Abigail hummed skeptically. "A friend who looks at you like you hung the moon." "I may be old, but I'm not blind," Josephine Zachary. Before Josephine could form a suitably dignified response, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. Adam rode into view, accompanied by Frank and several of his cowboys. They had completed their cattle delivery weeks earlier and returned to Tonopah Junction, ostensibly to accompany Josephine on her journey south. Adam dismounted with the easy grace she'd come to appreciate, approaching the porch with a smile that still caused her heart to skip. "Everything ready?" he asked, tipping his hat to both women. "All packed," Josephine confirmed. "Just saying my goodbyes." "I'll leave you to it," Abigail said with a knowing smile. She embraced Josephine once more before heading back toward town, but not before giving Adam a pointed look that made him clear his throat uncomfortably. When they were alone, Adam joined Josephine on the porch, looking out at the view she'd enjoyed for years. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. Josephine shook her head. "No, this chapter of my life is complete. I'm ready for what comes next." What came next was a journey both literal and figurative. They traveled south together, Adam and his men providing safe escort. Their destination was a small town in northern Arizona, close enough to Adam's ranch for convenience, but with its own distinct community where Josephine could establish herself anew. The journey took weeks, during which Josephine found herself healing in ways she hadn't thought possible. The grief for Matthew remained, but it softened, becoming a bittersweet memory rather than a crushing weight. And with each passing day, her friendship with Adam deepened into something more, a connection built on shared experience, mutual respect, and growing affection. By the time they reached the Arizona town of Pine Creek, Josephine had made her decision. The small house she purchased with proceeds from her Tonopah Junction property sat on the edge of town, with a view of distant mountains reminiscent of her Nevada home, but without the painful associations. Adam helped her settle in, introducing her to neighbors, assisting with repairs and improvements to the house. His own ranch lay a half-day's ride away, close enough for frequent visits, but maintaining a respectful distance that allowed their relationship to develop naturally. 3 months after arriving in Pine Creek, on a crisp autumn evening, Adam came to dinner at Josephine's house, as had become their custom twice weekly. After the meal, they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "I received a letter from Abigail today," Josephine remarked. "She says Sheriff Miller has been replaced. The town elected a new man last month, someone with a stronger sense of justice, she claims." "Good," Adam said. "Tonopah Junction deserves better leadership." He hesitated, then added, "She also wrote to me." Josephine turned to him in surprise. "Abigail wrote to you? Whatever for?" A smile played at the corners of Adam's mouth. "To inquire about my intentions toward a certain widow of her acquaintance, in rather direct terms, I might add." Heat rose to Josephine's cheeks. "That meddling woman. Adam, I'm so sorry. She has no right. She cares about you," Adam interrupted gently. "As do I." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. "Adam," Josephine began, her voice soft, "these past months have been unexpected." When Matthew died, I thought that part of my life, love, companionship, was over. I couldn't imagine feeling anything again except grief. And now, Adam asked, his gray eyes intent on her face. Now I find myself looking forward rather than back, she admitted. And you're a large part of the reason why. Adam reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. I told you once we would take things one day at a time, and I meant it. There's no rush, Josephine. Whatever grows between us will do so in its own time. Josephine turned her hand in his, intertwining their fingers. And if I find myself ready to acknowledge what has already grown, the hope that bloomed in Adam's expression was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. Then I would be the happiest man in the territory, he said simply. Josephine smiled, feeling a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. Matthew will always be part of me, she said softly. He was my first love, and I'll always honor his memory. As you should, Adam agreed. I would expect nothing less. But life continues, Josephine said, meeting his gaze directly. And I find that my heart has room for a second love, different but equally true. Adam's hand tightened around hers. With his free hand, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, simple ring, a silver band set with a single turquoise stone. I've been carrying this for weeks, he admitted, waiting for the right moment if it ever came. It's beautiful, Josephine whispered. It was my grandmother's, Adam explained. She was a strong woman who built a life on the frontier, much like you. He held the ring between them, a question in his eyes. Josephine Zachary, would you consider building a new life with me? Not to replace what you had with Matthew, but to create something new, a partnership of equals facing whatever comes together. Tears blurred Josephine's vision, but they were healing tears, releasing the last of her grief and making space for new joy. Yes, she said simply. I would be honored. The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, a symbol not of forgetting the past, but of embracing the future. As Adam leaned forward to seal their commitment with a gentle kiss, Josephine felt Matthew's presence one last time, not as a ghost haunting her, but as a blessing releasing her to love again. 1 year later, the Double E Ranch, named for Everett, and expanded with the addition of Josephine's property, had become one of the most prosperous in northern Arizona territory. The main house, originally built by Adam's father, had been enlarged and improved under Josephine's careful direction, becoming a true home for their blended family. On a sunny spring morning, Josephine stood on the wide porch, cradling her infant son in her arms. Thomas Matthew Everett was 3 months old, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined expression. Inside the house, Adam was finishing breakfast with his foreman, discussing the day's ranch operations. A rider appeared on the horizon, approaching along the road from town. As he drew nearer, Josephine recognized Frank, now head foreman of the Double E and a trusted friend. "Morning, Mrs. Everett," he called as he dismounted. "Mail day. Got several letters for you." "Thank you, Frank," Josephine replied with a smile. "Adam's inside if you need to speak with him." Left alone with her son and the mail, Josephine settled into a porch rocker, gently swaying as she sorted through the letters. One in particular caught her attention, the familiar handwriting of Abigail Murray from Tonopah Junction. Opening it eagerly, Josephine read the latest news from her old home. Abigail wrote of town developments, the continued prosperity of the mine that had once been Matthew's claim, now operated by a responsible company that paid fair wages, and personal updates from mutual acquaintances. Near the end of the letter, a passage brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "I visited Matthew's grave yesterday, as I do every month in your stead. I placed fresh flowers and told him all about you and Adam and the baby. I believe he would be happy for you, dear Josephine." You found justice for him, and then found the courage to embrace life again. There is no greater tribute to love than that." Josephine looked down at her sleeping son, then out across the ranch land stretching toward the mountains. The grief that had once consumed her had transformed into something softer, a gentle remembrance that coexisted peacefully with her present happiness. The screen door creaked as Adam stepped onto the porch. He paused, taking in the sight of his wife and son in the morning light, a smile spreading across his face. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting the letter in her hand and the shimmer of tears in her eyes. "Yes," Josephine said, returning his smile. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Adam crossed to them, placing a gentle kiss on his son's head before leaning down to kiss Josephine. "Frank says the north pasture is ready for the new calves," he reported. "Thought we might ride out later to see for ourselves if you're feeling up to it. Mrs. Hernandez said she'd be happy to watch Thomas for a few hours." "I'd like that," Josephine agreed. The occasional rides together had become precious time for them, a chance to enjoy the beauty of their land and each other's company away from the busy demands of ranch life and parenthood. As Adam returned inside to finish his business with Frank, Josephine continued rocking their son, her heart full. The journey from grief to love had been neither quick nor easy, but standing on the other side, she knew its value. She had learned that a heart once broken could mend and expand, that justice could prevail even in unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the most unexpected ally could become the greatest love of all. Thomas stirred in her arms, his tiny hand grasping her finger with surprising strength. Josephine smiled down at him, this perfect blend of past and present, of endings and beginnings. "Your father would have adored you," she whispered, meaning both men who had shaped her life, the one whose memory she honored and the one who stood beside her now, building their future together. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising rain for the thirsty land. Josephine watched them approach without fear, secure in the knowledge that whatever storms might come, she would never again face them alone.